The Roosevelt brothers were Ted and Kermit Roosevelt. They are the eldest brothers of the President Theodore Roosevelt. And these two sons of the president are really growing up with expectations on them. You can imagine what it would be like to be the sons of President Roosevelt. They had a lot on them, and there was a lot they wanted to accomplish. Yet when they took this expedition, they're searching for something more. They've already had a lot of failures in their lives. We see that Ted Jr., who is the president's eldest son, has struggled with a political career that just hasn't materialized. He's not quite like his famous father. And Kermit as well has struggled. He has had a lot of difficulties in his business. But the one thing they both love is exploration. This is a gift that they received from their father. And so in the 1920s, there is this search for the last large mammal unknown to science. And it's incredible to think about at that time, but pandas were not known to Westerners, and many people believed they were not real, that it was this mythical animal. And this isn't true for polar bears or black bears or brown bears, all of which had been known for thousands of years among humans. But for the panda, explorers had been searching for this bear for a decade by the time the Roosevelts begin their expedition. And so many expeditions had failed that at this point, nobody thought the Roosevelts would do much. They were not thinking that these two men, who were going with a small group to China and Tibet, would be very successful. And it's true that the party was small. So you have the Roosevelts, these two brothers, and then you also have a naturalist named Sudham Cutting, who's from New York City and is not particularly experienced, but is very intrepid. He's willing to do anything. And then you have Herbert Stevens, who is a biologist. He has a PhD, but he's been kind of turned away from a lot of the large societies in England. He lives in India, and so that might be why. A lot of his papers have been rejected. And then you have Tai Jack Young, who is an NYU student whose parents are from China and San Francisco. He was born in Hawaii, and so he has this fractured identity. He's going as the interpreter, but he's also trained in a lot of naturalist skills. So he's trained in biology at the Field Museum, which is the museum that's sponsoring this expedition. And so they go out for this trip into the Himalayas, perhaps not as well prepared as they should have been, but it ends up being a real transformation for each of them. There's so much research for a book like this, and I was fortunate for this book because I was able to get materials from each of the explorers. So I was able to get their field journals, their diaries, their letters. I was able to get the unpublished autobiography of Tai Jack Young. And so it allowed me to reconstruct the scenes from multiple perspectives and add a lot of detail. I was able to add dialogue. I was able to really bring the reader into what they were wearing, what they're eating, what they feel, what's happening in the moment for each of them. And this was really important to me. I wanted this book to feel immersive. I wanted it to feel as if you're on the trail with them. I feel like it's important when you're doing that to have the large perspective of what's happening, but also have that really grainy perspective of what the trail feels like, what these moments are like, especially because there is so much suffering. There's so many difficult moments they have on this expedition. They almost die several times, especially in the Himalayas, where they end up losing their food. They have altitude sickness. They become lost in a blizzard. There's just many, many difficult moments, and, I was fortunate to be able to get enough research to recreate it. I'm very careful not to write anything down that I do not have documentation for. So I don't recreate dialogue, I don't create scenes that I don't have documentation that happened. I think that's important. But the good news is that if you spend enough time, you can get those details, you can create scenes. And for this book, I was so fortunate because the writers themselves, the explorers, had just detailed what that was like and even their feelings, what they were saying to each other, and especially during the darkest moments where, Ted says this is, quote, the worst night of his life. They're bivouacked on the side of a mountain in the Himalayas. They're too exhausted to even pitch a tent. They are close to death. And to be able to create that moment, it's it's not really about creativity. It's more about making sure you have enough research to back up those scenes. And I think it does help. to read books that do that well because there are so many great books, and I feel like that was a real boon to me to look at books such as River of Doubt by Candice Millard, where she's able to do that really well. She brings her research skills to create all kinds of details in that text, and I think that's important. This is an important part of the book, and to me, it is so wonderful to see the redemption and the transformation in their journeys because these are men that went into this exploration believing they were hunting this aggressive beast. They believed they were hunting a bear that was a combination of a polar bear and a black bear that was going to be, quote, "the most aggressive animal in the world." That is really what they thought a panda would be. And that, I mean, that goes to tell you how little we understood about pandas at that time. And of course, what they found is something quite different. And they do kill the panda, they bring it back to the Field Museum. But there are unintended consequences of this journey. And what we see is that all of these hunting explorations, all of these big game hunters, all of the sudden have the means to find the panda now, thanks to the Roosevelt expedition. And not only that, but you also have other explorers who now, because they know where the panda is, go into the woods to steal cubs for American zoos. And the Roosevelts are aghast at what has happened. They talk about this in many letters, in many journal entries. This is a real source of heartbreak for them. And it's because of this that they decide to fight for changes in wildlife conservation. And it's a whole change in philosophy because they go from being scientists, like many scientists were at the time, who believed that the only way to save endangered animals was to document them. Nature had made its choice, humans had very little control, and so the best thing to do was to go out there and hunt as many as you could so that way they could be studied. This seems crazy. We can't even imagine such a thing today. But at the time, this was the thinking. And it's really this expedition that changes that thinking. Because what you have is Kermit Roosevelt, who ends up becoming president of the Audubon Society and has an important place in the New York Zoological Society. And he works to change how protections are made for the panda. And he does quite a bit of diplomacy with Chinese officials. And the panda ends up being the first endangered animal that gets these protections. And it just becomes, of course, today we can't think of the panda without thinking of it as being emblematic of animals and conservation. That wouldn't have happened without the Roosevelts. They are the ones that started that. And as I talk about in the book, it makes a difference not just for the panda, but for so many different animals around the globe.